Welcome to Commander Citadel with your host, Elder. Enjoy the show. I'll be on Heliod the Radiant Dawn. The strategy of this deck is to cast my commander and immediately transform it. To its backside, Heliod the Warped Eclipse. Then I'll force my opponents to draw cards to lower the cost of all my spells. As soon as the lowered cost is high, I'll finish off the game with a big X spell. Mike is on the Gitrog monster. The goal of this deck is to cast the Gitrog monster, play extra lands that could be sacrificed to get the Gitrog monster engine going, recur all the lands from the graveyard, and then destroy all of your opponent's lands. Miguel is on Thalia and the Gitrog monster. The goal of this deck is to limit your opponent's plays with stacks pieces, play cards with landfall triggers, and a hint of some graveyard recursion. James is on Djeru and Hazoret. This commander can cheat out big creatures from the library onto the battlefield with this attack trigger. It's also stacked with a lot of extra combat cards to continue the onslaught. Now that we have our contenders, let the game begin. Since I won the dice roll, I'll go first. I started off by playing an Ancient Tomb, tap it for 2 mana and 2 life, cast Thought Vessel. Mike's turn, he plays a land, Mana Crypt, taps 3, sacrifices a forest, and plays Rolling Regrowth, searching out a snow-covered forest and a swamp into the battlefield tapped. Miguel plays a very sad Reflecting Pool and passes on to James. On James's turns, he'll play a Plains and passes on to me. On my turn, I'll play Mana Confluence, tap 4, dealing 3 damage to myself, and casting Smothering Tide. Things are getting spicy. On Mike's upkeep, there's a Mana Crypt trigger. He rolls a dice and wins the roll. When he draws, Smothering Tide's trigger, and he pays the 2 so I don't get my treasure. Womp womp. He plays a swamp, taps 3 for Harrow, sacrificing a swamp, searching out a forest and another snow-covered swamp onto the battlefield. On Miguel's draw, Smothering Tide's trigger, he does not have the 2, so I create a treasure. He plays a Plains and casts an Arcane Signet. On Miguel's end step, James is going to cast an Enlightened Tutor, searching out a Mana Crypt, and he places it on top of his library. On his draw, Smothering Tide's trigger, he does not pay the 2, and I create another treasure. He plays a mountain and casts Mana Crypt. He taps Mana Crypt to cast Reckoner Bankbuster with 3 charge counters on it. On my turn, I play Reliquary Tower. I tap Mana Confluence, dealing a damage to myself, and I crack a treasure to cast Grand Abolisher. I tap Ancient Tomb, dealing 2 damage to myself, and I crack the last treasure for blue mana. I tap Reliquary Tower and Thought Vessel. With 2 of the colorless mana, I cast Arcane Signet. With the last 3 mana, I cast Days Undoing. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and draws 7 cards. If it's your turn, end the turn. Pause the video. There is an illegal play done on my behalf that unfortunately goes unnoticed. After Days Undoing resolves, you will see Smothering Tide trigger 21 times, creating 21 treasures. This move is illegal because after Days Undoing resolves, the turn should end immediately without triggering Smothering Tide. Now, since no one at the table caught this critical mistake, we now have to change the text of Days Undoing slightly. The sentence now reads, if it's your turn, resolve all your triggers and then end the turn. There you have it. Problem solved. Now, back to the game. On Mike's turn, Mana Crypt triggers, he rolls a dice and wins the roll. On his draw, Smothering Tide's triggers, he does not pay the 2 and I create a treasure. He taps 3, uses 2 of that mana to cast Lotus Cobra. He plays an Ancient Tomb, triggering Lotus Cobra, adding 1 green mana to his mana pool. He taps Ancient Tomb, dealing 2 damage to himself, and he casts Cultivate, searching out a snow-covered swamp to play tap and a snow-covered forest into his hand. Then he'll cast Into the North, searching out Woodland Chasm into play tapped. He ends his turn. On Miguel's draw, Smothering Tide triggers, he does not pay the 2, I create another treasure. Miguel shocks in the Temple Garden into play, taps 2 to cast Nature's Lure, searching out a Bayou into play. Then he taps 1 to cast Birds of Paradise. During the end step, James is going to tap 2 to trigger Reckoner Bankbuster, drawing a card. When he draws, Smothering Tide will trigger, he won't pay the 2, I create another treasure. On his upkeep, Mana Crypt will trigger, he'll roll the dice and lose a roll, dealing 3 damage to himself. On his draw, Smothering Tide will trigger, he will not pay the 2 and I'll create another treasure. He'll play a command tower, he'll tap the mana crypt to cast Felwar Stone, ending his turn. On James's end step, Mike is going to cast Assassin's Trophy, targeting my Grand Abolisher. His plan is to be able to interact on my turn to keep me on check, and he succeeds. My Grand Abolisher gets destroyed, but I get to search out a basic island into play. On my turn, I do have a backup plan. I tap 1 to cast Silence. Your opponents can't cast spells this turn. Miguel responds by channeling Boseiju, who endures. This gets to destroy any artifact or enchantment, and he targets my Smothering Tithe. I do not have a response, and my Smothering Tithe gets destroyed. I do get to search out a basic land type. I choose Tundra, and I put it into play. Now that Silence has resolved, the endgame shall now commence. I tap 4 to cast Aetherflux Reservoir. I tap 4 more to cast my commander, Heliod the Radiant Dawn, which is going to trigger Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 3 life. I immediately crack 4 treasures to transform my Heliod into Heliod the Warped Eclipse. Then I cast Vision Schemes. Each player draws 2 cards. This is going to trigger Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 4 life, and bringing Heliod's count up to 6. Then I'll cast Heliod's Intervention, where X equals 5. I will destroy all of my opponent's artifacts. This will also trigger Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 5 life. I'll cast Windfall, triggering Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 6 life. James has 10 cards in his hand, so each player will discard their hand and draw 10 cards. This is going to boost Heliod's count to 36. I'll cast Psychosis Crawler for free, triggering Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 7 life. I'll cast Manifold, triggering Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 8 life. I'll cast Teferi's Puzzle Box for free, triggering Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 9 life. Then I'll cast Memory Jar, triggering Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 10 life. I'll follow this up with a Silver Scrutiny, where X is 36. This is going to trigger Aetherflux Reservoir, gaining 11 life. I'll draw 36 cards, and that's going to trigger Psychosis Crawler 36 times, dealing damage to each opponent. Finally, I'll finish off the game with the Mind's Aglow for 2. I'll draw 2 cards, that's going to trigger Psychosis Crawler for 2, and all my opponents lose 2 life, bringing them to 0. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.